Welcome back. It is your feel-good breakfast show, Expresso on S3. Now, we are about to introduce you to our panel discussion because the pro-life versus pro-choice debate can be an intimidating issue, but no matter where you stand, we live in a world where most women are given the right to choose how they navigate their pregnancies. However, in a historic and far-reaching decision, the U.S. Supreme Court officially reversed Roe v. Wade last Friday, declaring that the constitutional right to abortion no longer exists. Now, sadly, young women today will come of age with fewer rights than their mothers and grandmothers. And today we discuss the importance of a woman's right to reproductive health care and freedom of choice. And from the Women's Legal Center, we have Director Siam Samai, as well as Attorney Kuliso Mananga. Completing our panel is Marion Stevens, who is an academic and founding director of the Sexual and Reproductive Justice Coalition at Stellenbosch University. Now, we also encourage you at home to join in on this panel discussion. Please share your thoughts and your experiences with voice notes. We would love to hear your voice. That number is 063 408 8863. Ladies, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
A very serious conversation that should be had. I think I've never seen social media blow up so much. It's everywhere. Let's unpack this. In terms of what this means for South Africa right now, what is our take on it, abortion rights in South Africa?
Can I just, we do know that, Section 12 in our Constitution is exceptionally clear. And although the Roe versus Wade, the Dodgson judgment might have broad impact, we do know that Section 12 gives the protection to women to ensure that they have got bodily integrity and a right to abortion. But it's the softer issues which is not the legislative protection, but the softer issues around the barriers, around the attitudes. And we do know that South Africa comes through a very checkered past where historically abortion access was given to a small minority. And we have black women that had to go to your backstreet abortions, etc. So we're sitting with that challenges. And when we talk about implementation, these women have to navigate all of those boundaries, barriers, attitudes, behaviors, which actually stops them. And I think what happens is that America's challenge is, we all know, America is where young people, they lead in terms of narratives, and we are concerned that very conservative views will come through in South Africa.
Because they've always been a bit like ahead of the pack in terms of, I don't want to call this a trend set, but what happens in America ripple effects throughout the world. Now, Kuliso, for those at home who do not understand what just happened in the US with the Roe versus Wade being reversed, can you fill us in on that?
Sure. So in America, their system is a lot different to ours. Their legal system is vastly different to ours, and that's very great for us and horrible for them, of course. For them, in their case, they do not have an express right to the right to abortion in their constitution. So for them, they have several other rights, but there's no actual right in the constitution like we do that says you have a right to reproductive health care and you have the right to bodily autonomy, et cetera, et cetera. For them, what they had to do in Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood case was they had to actually interpret that right out of other constitutional rights, the right to liberty, and the right to privacy. And what they did is they interpreted it to extend to include the right to abortion. And those were the foundations of how abortion worked once Roe versus Wade and then Casey came to confirm that. And then that meant that nationally, for the United States, you could not ban abortions, and that nationally that was a constitutionally protected right. And that meant various states continue to have issues with this, and even though it was constitutionally protected, we did continue to see a lot of challenges and a lot of ways to claw back at this constitutionally protected thing, and it was continually contested to the point where just recently we had the Dobbs versus Jackson case. So this was a case that came out in the American courts, and it essentially at the base level dealt with there was an abortion ban in a specific state, and they wanted to bring that abortion ban down. So this abortion ban spanned past the 15-week line. And they wanted to have that declared unconstitutional because the Constitution gives the right to abortion. This case continued, and then it got to the Supreme Court, which just last Friday, decided, unfortunately, that because there is no express right, they said that the way Roe and Planned Parenthood interpreted these rights to give effect to abortion were incorrect, and that they would not be protecting this right going forward. So this now means that women in America face a situation where their states have to individually decide how abortion is going to be regulated going forward.
Hectic. I mean, I'm looking at your face and literally you are taking sighs, you're taking gulps, because this hit home for all of us. But what was the reasoning behind this reversal?
So, you know, the States has got a very conservative society. And in South Africa, you know, what happens in the US, when they sneeze, we get flu. And there is a kind of cultural distortion and imperialism, as you've both said, where these kind of ideas filter through. But I want to just alert listeners to say that in South Africa, we have got a very different legal and policy context. And in fact, we are taking these issues a lot further, where our government is actually hosting a conference on reproductive justice, which takes these kinds of issues a lot further than the individualized American conceptualization of rights and choice. It actually talks to justice, which Siam alluded to earlier on, which talks to our political history of population control, where Black women were not afforded options and choices. And in fact, our previous abortion law was about ensuring that white women produced to be concerned about the numbers in the population, which is essentially what's happening in South Africa. But reproductive justice means that we support parenting people to choose to parent in a context that's affirming, and also to choose not to if they don't want to. And so this really advances some of these ideas. And you know, government has got a policy position on this, and it's actually advancing this, even though things in the country are quite dismal at the moment, to be honest. This is something that on paper government is trying to get correct. But I also think that the complexity of this political situation in the US is important to take note, because it does filter in. And we do have a 3% party, as they say, that's taking on these ideas, anti-abortion, homophobic, transphobic, opposing comprehensive sexuality education, opposing, you know, children talking about critical race theory. All these ideas and discourse and narratives, as Shyam says, filtering in to our debates and stopping us from our own South African discussions and ideas. But it's very good that we're talking about reproductive justice, which is a concept that originated in the States, developed by Black feminists, and it's filtered into South Africa, and we are making it our own.
I'm glad we are making it our own. Well, ladies, don't go anywhere. Our panel discussion is going to continue. We do have our WhatsApp line open if you would love to weigh in. That number is 063 408 8863. We will be back with our panel shortly.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back, everybody. We are still talking about the reproductive rights that women have with regards to their bodies. We're talking about the abortions rights in South Africa as well. And we do have the panel here with us today. So, ladies, thank you so much for joining us. I know we were in a meaty conversation during the ad break. We can't still understand. It almost feels like we're moving backwards in the space that women now have no control over their rights, over their bodies, that there's still some sort of control. But when we open up this conversation, what are we saying to the people right now? What are we saying to the States right now as women in South Africa?
Well, for our end, what we are emphasizing, it's now time for all of us to stand strongly behind our right to abortion and the right to reproductive justice. as a whole. The whole field of reproductive justice currently has such a huge stigma. It's shrouded in a lot of shame and guilt and judgment and overall the patriarchy that just really suffocates this issue for women. And so now it's time for us to own this space in a South African society where these things are even taboo to discuss. It's not a conversation that everyday South Africans have. We have so many issues about how so many women, even in South Africa, don't even know they have a right to abortion to begin with, let alone how to access them, where to go, or how to go about it. And even when they try to, it's such a frustrating process that it almost seems as though the right isn't actually realized. So it's time for us to really prioritize this right and to ensure that we are looking at how it actually looks like. And we are really examining that if I am in a position where I need to obtain an abortion, is it really accessible to me? Is the government prioritizing my needs? Is this a choice that I actually really have? And is this important conversations that need to be had? Because the reality is, it's only that discussion you start to have it when it happens to you, but it's such an important discussion to have before, because abortion is also so time sensitive that when it happens and all these things are in place, it can completely spiral very quickly. So it's very essential that these conversations are had, that the facilities are looked at, that access is looked at, that information is looked at, and that we really pay attention to what it means to have this right and what it means for women in South Africa to have this right.
So important. Now, we are having this discussion now here on TV. We've invited our viewers to send through voice notes. We got one from Reiki that we would love to play out to you.
Good morning, Expresso. It's Reiki Finch from Madiveng Brits. I just want to say it's every individual's own choice, but still it is murder in my eyes, but everybody got their own choice to make. And I would say if the parents of today is so busy, there's not really time to look after the daughters. So daughters experiment on things that is not right. So in my opinion, I think the mothers must talk to the daughters. Thank you.
So this is our viewers' view, but I get frustrated when the emphasis is like it takes two people to fall pregnant and the attention is being put on the woman. But I feel like, Marion, as a midwife, right now in South Africa with our own abortion laws, up until what phase is it viable for a woman to get an abortion? How many weeks?
So our law makes provision under, there was a lot of research and work that happened in the early 90s around our law, and there are different provisions at different stages of gestation and development. And so essentially, up until about 20 weeks, if they're very strict conditions, if the continuing pregnancy is a danger to the fetus, or it's going to harm the pregnant person's life, the woman's life. And listening to your person in terms of murder, I want to ask her, what would it mean if her daughter, who's happily married, has an ectopic pregnancy and is sitting on the table, and the doctor says, I cannot operate on you because I cannot kill that fetus. But that ectopic pregnancy is going to burst in her fallopian tube and rupture her uterine artery, and that woman's going to die. What would it mean for her daughter? And that is the context, the radical, extreme nature of what's happening in the US. They are banning abortion outright. And I've had colleagues this week talk about having to deal with a situation and a woman having a ruptured artery in the US and them having to go in and try and save this woman. And the America has one of the highest rates of maternal mortality for a developed world. In fact, it's almost comparable with developing countries. So women are dying in large numbers in America due to pregnancy because of these very extreme and underdeveloped, to be honest, women's health situation.
See, I want us to unpack more of the negative factors when it comes to this, because what they're also saying is now you're forcing women to choose between bringing up a child when they have post-trauma, when you bring up a child into poverty. What does this mean in terms of now forcing women to say, like, you can't have an abortion anymore, you have to go through with this pregnancy?
Well, as Khaleesa has indicated, I mean, we've got the legislative framework. We've got policy. We have government saying these are the centers where you can go to, etc., etc. However, we do know that it's not accessible. More than 3,000 healthcare centers, we're sitting with less than 7% of those that is actually accessible to women. So when you get the access, one of the issues is around conscientious objection, which means that healthcare professionals actually saying that they are not going to do the abortion because of a conscientious objection, religious, whatever it might be. That in itself, and because abortion is time sensitive, you can push it from 18 over to 20, which means it's a completely different requirements, and also you will have to go then to a second stage and need to be able to, and if that information is not there, the person is going to go through the particular pregnancy. And also, in addition to that, which our not abortion service, our adoption services in itself is not even an option for, like reproductive justice or rights, because that is not an option for Black women too, the system in itself, which means that in terms of choice, the entire system is working against that woman to be not exercising or not being allowed to exercise her right. In addition to that, just coming back to America, when we talk about the narrative, this has been coming on for the past 30 years.
Yeah, 40 years.
Roe versus Wade, there has been a pushback globally. There's also a shrinking of women's spaces. So I do think that it is a deliberate move of right-wing, conservative persons who are pushing a very particular agenda. And it is coming through in terms of South Africa. We do know that they have the pregnancy centers, which is in America very much backed up by a conservative Christian funding. And that, although we don't have any research, but anecdotal, we do know that behavior or those issues filter through the pregnancy centers that has been set up in South Africa. So it has been set up with a very particular bias. And we need to understand that South Africa, we have a huge, not just group, but that is pushing for that conservative views to come through our court systems, through our policies, through our centers, and how do we deal with that? We know that we do have the right in terms of Section 12. However, a lot of work needs to be done to ensure broader access. As Khaleesa said, shame that women have to deal with, because the consciousness is around murder, is around a fetus, around exceptionally extreme pushback. And women have to deal with that.
Well, this is a conversation that we can have at length. We are going to continue it. We're going to be here for you. If you would love to weigh in on this conversation, please voice note us your thoughts. Perhaps you have a take on something we've said. Our number is 063 408 8863.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back. It is your Feel Good Breakfast Show, and we're continuing the final part of our conversation this morning with our panel. Now, although women have a constitutional right to an abortion in South Africa, less than 7% of healthcare facilities provide access to abortion services, and of the 505 facilities specifically designed to provide these services, less than 200 are operational. Thus, we continue our discussion on the importance of reproductive rights during the reversal of those rights in the USA. And we encourage you to join us in on this conversation. Share your thoughts. perhaps your experiences, and you can do so via voice note. Our number is 063 408 8863.
Ladies, I do believe we have a WhatsApp voice note from Adian. This is what they had to say on the line.
Hello, this is Adibao Managa from Rustenburg, Northwest, and I feel that women should have the right to decide whether or not they get an abortion, whether or not they have a child of their own, and have the free will and should be allowed to get abortions when necessary.
So that was our first voice note that came through. Let's take a listen to one that came through from Anthea.
Good morning, Expresso team. I also was against abortions until I needed an abortion because of an ectopic pregnancy. Women will decide for themselves. They know what their body needs. We can't decide for anyone else.
Okay. Well, so we have two very different takes. Marian, I'm going to start off with you. Those statistics of the lack of infrastructure, or out of the 505 facilities that is currently available to South African women, only 200 are operational. Do we know why that is the case?
So when the Choice of Termination of Pregnancy Act was liberalized, there was a lot of engagement and work to try and work towards implementation. But this kind of was distracted by the imposition of the gag rule by George Bush in 2000. And the US actually provides a lot of funding in South Africa. It's their largest funding through the state, US aid, but also through private donors. And so essentially our government then stepped back. And at that time as well, it was the HIV infection, and rightly, everything was focused on HIV treatment. And so for the past 20 odd years or so, we have not done anything really from the state. There's been work done by international NGOs and by, funded by private donors, but we haven't institutionalized training of health workers around abortion. Doctors graduate in South Africa without being able to put in an IUD, do a pap smear, and even do emergency treatment if you've got a septic abortion, which is ridiculous because in the rest of the region, in Zambia and Zimbabwe, doctors graduate with these skills. We don't have generic abortion drugs registered through SAPRA. We saw all the work, we've heard all about SAPRA through COVID. In Zambia, there are 3 generic abortion drugs registered. And so our tracking of reproductive health commodities is not okay. And also, health workers have somehow now heard about this language of conscientious objection, which has come from the States, as Shyam talks about these narratives, this discourse. Conscientious objection in South Africa, the legal understanding of that has been around military refusal and around, white boys not wanting to go into the army ages ago under apartheid. We don't have the language of conscientious objection. In our law, we've got the language of obstruction to access or refusal to care. And that is somehow what health workers have started to do and embrace. We, as a health worker, me training under apartheid, we would never refuse somebody care. If somebody came in, you went to them and you assisted and delivered. And now what's happening is you're starting to see health workers willy-nilly, Shyam.
Oh, so you're okay. You're welcome to step off if you need to a second.
So you've started to see health workers refuse to care and refuse to provide services. And in many ways, this is filtered through as something that health workers have adopted, and it's become accepted. And I think that that's because there's been a refusal to lead by the Department of Health.
I just wanted to find out, because we are running out of time, I wanted to know, for someone, a woman in South Africa that is seeking access to these services and they are not able to, what are their options, what are their choices?
In terms of that, the SETOPA Act is very clear that when they are faced in a situation where someone is trying to obstruct their access, this is actually it's a criminal offense in terms of the Act. So in terms of that, that person can actually get prosecuted, and it's something that you can report to the police. But because we, of course, know we have general issues with our policing system, some women might feel safer with approaching lawyers. So we really generally encourage women to approach organizations like the SRJC or our Women's Legal Center and to report these cases, because it's important that women not only understand that this is a right that's constitutional, it's a right that needs to be protected, and they need to ensure that no one gets in between them and their right. So when this happens to them, when a healthcare provider refuses service, when a security guard tells them that we actually are not doing anything today, please go away, this is an offense. This should not be happening to them. And if they're ever in a position where access is being frustrated or they're being run around for whatever reason, this is something they should report. This is something that they need to alert people about, because once we shine light into the struggles of what women are actually going through, we can all collectively start really investigating and looking into these issues and work to correct that system.
I definitely feel like we still have a long way to go. However, it is important that we have these conversations. It's important that we have these panels to bring your insight on this topic, ladies.
Thank you very much for having us.
No, thank you.
And for, setting the scene and having this discourse, because I think a lot of people have a lot to learn. The callers were it was so nice to hear what people were saying and to see the kind of correlation between the person that was opposed to and somebody else that said, I was opposed and now I'm supportive because of that extreme example of ectopic pregnancy. I think people need to have these conversations safely.
Well, Marian, Kaliso, thank you so much for joining us today. And if you would love to weigh in, our WhatsApp line is always open to you.